Chapter 1. A Birthday with Only One Cake. The smell of vanilla frosting drifted through the Sullivan household that Sunday morning. Balloons floated lazily around the living room, and a pink "Happy Birthday Olivia" banner stretched across the wall. The house was filled with laughter and the occasional burst of confetti as guests arrived with wrapped gifts and wide smiles. Emma stood near the staircase, her back pressed against the wall. She clutched a small, handmade card to her chest. It had taken her 3 days to draw the perfect butterfly on the front and write her birthday wishes inside. Not her birthday wishes, but Olivia's. She had learned by now that her own birthday, which fell just 4 days before Olivia's, would never be celebrated. She was 10 years old, but for as long as she could remember, the birthday party had always belonged to her older sister. Emma, don't just stand there. Help your sister carry the cake out. Her mother, Linda, barked from the kitchen. Emma nodded silently, walking over to the counter where the large pink cake sat. It was beautiful, 3 layers with cream roses and "To our precious Olivia" written in curly white letters. As she carefully carried it toward the dining table, Olivia strutted by in her new dress, twirling once to let the skirt flow around her. "Be careful, Olivia said, not out of concern but authority. "That cake's for someone special." Emma flinched but didn't respond. She set the cake down gently while the guests clapped and sang. The candles were lit, and Olivia made a big show of closing her eyes and making a wish. When she blew them out, the room erupted in applause. No one noticed Emma quietly stepping back, her fingers still sticky with icing. No one asked where her birthday card was. No one realized the smaller cake she had once hoped to have, the one she dreamed of since last year, was never even ordered. Later, as the guests enjoyed slices of cake and laughter bubbled over like soda from a shaken can, Emma slipped out to the backyard. The grass was damp with morning dew. She sat beneath the old maple tree and pulled the crumpled card from her pocket. She opened it and read the words she had written in shaky pencil. "Happy birthday, Olivia. I hope all your dreams come true." She stared at the words for a long moment before folding the card again and burying it under a patch of earth near the tree's roots. It wasn't just about a cake. It was never about a cake. It was the way her mother looked at Olivia with pride and at Emma with fatigue. The way her father always asked about Olivia's grades, but never remembered that Emma had won the school spelling bee. It was the way teachers at school said, "Oh, you're Olivia's sister," and expected nothing more. She had learned, quietly and early, that there were no applause breaks for shadows. And she was the shadow. That night, Emma lay in bed while Olivia's laughter echoed down the hallway. The house still buzzed with leftover joy and the scent of frosting. Her room, smaller and darker, was quiet. She turned to face the wall and whispered to herself, "One day, I'll have my own cake. And I won't have to share it with anyone." But even then, a part of her knew she didn't want cake. She just wanted to be seen. Chapter 2. The Prize with the Wrong Name. It was the spring of Emma's 12th year when the statewide Young Writers competition came around. Their English teacher, Mrs. Grant, had gently encouraged both sisters to enter. "You're both such promising young minds," she had said with a smile. But it was Emma who stayed up night after night, scribbling into her notebook, whispering poems to herself in the dark, and crossing out entire paragraphs in frustration. She submitted a story titled "The Quiet Bird," about a small, unnoticed bird who saved a forest during a great storm without anyone ever knowing. 2 months later, a letter arrived from the competition board. Emma's heart pounded as she saw the envelope in her mother's hands. But Linda didn't even look in her direction. "Olivia," she called, walking straight past Emma to hand the envelope to her older daughter. Emma blinked. Olivia opened it, skimmed the contents, and squealed. "I won first place. Mom, Dad, I actually won." George, their father, put down his newspaper for the first time that morning and beamed. "That's my girl. But Emma started to say something, to protest, to ask anything. Linda cut her off without even turning her head. "Don't be rude, Emma. Let your sister have her moment." Emma's lips parted, but no sound came out. She felt like she was falling, even though she hadn't moved an inch. That weekend, they drove 2 hours to Sacramento for the award ceremony. Emma sat in the back seat, holding the dress her mom made her wear, an old one of Olivia's that didn't quite fit at the waist. Olivia, in contrast, wore a brand new pale blue dress that shimmered under the California sun. Inside the hall, the announcer mispronounced Olivia's name slightly as he said, "And the winner of this year's Young Writers competition for her heartfelt story The Quiet Bird is Olivia Sullivan." Emma didn't clap. She couldn't. Her hands refused to move. Olivia walked up to the stage, waving like a queen, and accepted the certificate and a check for $500. She gave a speech. She thanked her supportive family and said she always loved to write since I was little. The crowd clapped, unaware that the real author sat 2 rows back, quietly staring at the floor. That night, while Olivia video called her friends to brag, Emma pulled her notebook out of her drawer. On the inside cover, written in faint, penciled script, were the words, "By Emma Sullivan, age 12. For the birds that never get thanked." She tore the page out, but she didn't cry. She just folded it into a perfect square, like origami, and placed it into a shoebox under her bed where dozens of other hidden pages lived. It wasn't about the money, or the certificate, or the applause. It was the lie. The way Olivia had read her story aloud with no hesitation, as if it had always belonged to her, as if Emma's words were nothing more than a costume her sister wore for attention. And the worst part? Everyone believed it. For Emma, that night became a turning point. It wasn't the moment she gave up, it was the moment she began counting. Counting every injustice, every silenced voice, every piece of herself she had to bury. One day, she promised herself again. One day, she wouldn't just be the author of her story. She would own it. Chapter 3. The Unspoken Trade. The autumn breeze had just begun to chill the California air when Emma's high school counselor, Ms. Jensen, called her into the office with a radiant smile. "You did it, Emma," she said, holding up an envelope with a crimson seal. "Congratulations. You've been awarded a full scholarship to Columbia University." Emma blinked. The words didn't immediately register. Full scholarship. Columbia. New York City. Freedom. Her hands trembled as she took the letter. The official emblem of the Ivy League institution stamped like a passport out of everything she had ever known. "You're one of the most brilliant students I've ever worked with, Emma," Jensen added warmly. "Promise me you'll go. You deserve this." Emma nodded slowly, clutching the envelope to her chest as if afraid someone might rip it away. But someone did, just not in the way she expected. That night, around the dinner table, she shared the news. "I got in," Emma said, barely able to contain her joy. "Columbia. They're giving me a full ride. Tuition, room, board, everything." For a moment, there was silence. Then Linda cleared her throat. "Well," she said, without looking up from her plate. "That's nice." George didn't react at all. He simply reached for another piece of bread. It was Olivia who broke the silence. "Columbia? That's in New York, right?" Emma nodded, her smile dimming. George finally spoke. "It's too far. You're only 17. A girl has no business living alone in a city like that." "But Dad," Emma began. "You'll go to Bakersfield Community College like Olivia did." "That's what's best." Emma's heart sank. "I got a scholarship. I won't need money. I've earned this." Linda set down her fork. "This family needs you here, Emma. And besides," she glanced at George, who gave her a nod. Linda turned back. "The Waltons came by this morning." Emma froze. "No. Yes, George said, his tone final. Marcus Walton has shown interest in marrying you. He has his own business. It's a good match. I'm not. Emma could barely breathe. I'm not marrying him. Linda's voice grew sharper. You think dreams pay for your father's medical bills? Or Olivia's tuition? Marcus can provide for the family. And he's made it clear. He wants you. Emma stared at them in disbelief. It wasn't a conversation. It was a decision already made. She looked at Olivia, expecting protest, sympathy, anything. But Olivia just took another bite of her food and said nothing. Why not Olivia? Emma asked, her voice cracking. Don't be ridiculous, Linda said. She has potential. Marcus needs someone stable. Stable? The word pierced Emma like a blade. They didn't see her as a daughter. They saw her as a trade. A dowry. A sacrifice. Emma stood up, her chair scraping loudly across the floor. I'm not staying here. I'm not marrying anyone. I'm going to New York. You walk out that door, George said coldly. Don't bother coming back. Emma didn't answer. She walked up to her room, packed everything she could fit into one duffel bag, and at midnight, slipped out into the cold. As she stood at the bus station with the envelope still clenched in her hand, Emma looked back once. The house was dark. No porch light. No farewell. No one chasing after her. She climbed onto the midnight bus to New York, the Columbia letter folded in her coat pocket like a fragile piece of salvation. She had given away stories. Given away credit. Given away her own voice. But not this. Not her future. They could take everything else. But they couldn't take this. Chapter 4. The first cold morning in New York. The bus pulled into Port Authority at 6:13 a.m., the sky still painted in the soft gray of early dawn. Emma stepped off, her breath turning to mist in the sharp, unfamiliar chill. The weight of the duffel bag on her shoulder was nothing compared to the weight on her chest. She was 17. Alone. And free. Her phone buzzed as she stood on the curb. Dozens of missed calls from home. A long string of texts from Linda, ranging from guilt-laced pleading to furious ultimatums. Olivia had even posted a vague update on social media. Some people don't understand what family means. Emma didn't reply. She turned her phone off. The city was louder than she imagined, car horns, subway rumbles beneath her feet. People shouting even at that early hour. It was overwhelming. But beneath the fear and the hunger in her stomach, there was something else. A pulse. A quiet certainty. This was the beginning. Emma made her way to the Columbia campus in Morningside Heights, following handwritten directions from the acceptance package. The buildings rose around her like ancient fortresses, majestic, intimidating, and humming with ambition. She stopped outside the admissions office, clutching her paperwork like a lifeline. Hi, she whispered to the woman at the front desk. I'm Emma Sullivan. I'm here to check in. For the scholarship program. The woman gave her a warm smile. Welcome to Columbia, Emma. We've been expecting you. Those simple words, we've been expecting you, landed deeper than anyone could have known. For the first time in her life, someone was waiting for her arrival. Later that day, she moved into a shared dorm room. It was small, with plain white walls and a single window overlooking a tree-lined path. Her roommate hadn't arrived yet. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around her duffel bag like a shield. For the first few days, she barely spoke to anyone. She attended orientation, listened during class introductions, and nodded when spoken to. But she didn't share. No one here knew who she was or what she left behind. And for now, that was a relief. But New York was brutal. Cold wind tore through her coat every morning. She walked miles across campus, avoiding the dining hall because she didn't want to spend her limited meal credits. Her part-time job at a diner downtown paid just enough to survive, but barely enough to sleep. Some nights she stayed up until 3 a.m. doing homework. Other nights, she sat awake staring out the window, asking herself if she'd made the right choice. Was this what freedom really looked like? Tired, hungry, alone. But then came Sophia. Emma met her on the 4th day of class, brilliant, blunt, with dyed green tips and an infectious laugh. She plopped down next to Emma during a group project and said, "You look like someone who doesn't pretend." "I like that." Emma blinked. "Is that good?" "It's rare," Sophia shrugged. "Most people fake it until they become it." "I think you're still real." That afternoon, they shared coffee on the steps of the library. For the first time since arriving, Emma laughed, just once, but it was enough to make her eyes water. As weeks turned to months, the two became inseparable. Emma found herself learning how to speak again. Not just academically, but emotionally. One rainy Tuesday evening, after they both pulled an all-nighter coding a lab assignment, Sophia handed her a mug of hot tea and asked, "What made you come here, Emma?" "Really?" Emma stared into the steam. She could have lied. But instead, she whispered, "Because it was the first thing I ever wanted that they couldn't take from me." Sophia didn't ask who they were. She just nodded. That winter, Emma stood in the snow outside the university library, her coat wrapped tight around her, watching students rush past. She felt the cold bite at her cheeks, but she didn't flinch. She had survived the storm. Not just of weather, but of silence, of betrayal, of being invisible. And now she was visible. To the world, to the sky, to herself. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real beginning. Chapter 5. The Room Without Shadows. The next semester brought both growth and gravity. Emma had found her rhythm, morning classes, afternoon research work in the AI lab, and weekend shifts at the diner. Her days were full, but not heavy. Her life was still difficult, but the weight was hers to carry. For once, no one was pressing her down. One evening in early March, a soft knock came at the dorm room door. Sophia was sprawled on the floor with her headphones in, and Emma was half buried in a pile of papers and textbooks. Emma opened the door to find a young man in a Columbia hoodie, holding a flyer and smiling awkwardly. "Hey, sorry to bother. I'm helping run the Columbia Voices storytelling night next week. We're inviting students to share personal stories, anything real. You look like someone who might have something to say." Emma blinked. "Me? Yeah. I've seen you around the AI lab. You're always quiet. Thought maybe there's more to you than code." She hesitated. I don't really do public speaking. Doesn't have to be polished. Just has to be true." He handed her the flyer. "You'd be surprised who needs to hear what you've been through." He turned to go, then paused. Sometimes, stories are the only way out of silence. Emma stared at the paper for a long moment after he left. Sophia looked up from her spot on the floor and raised an eyebrow. "You gonna do it?" "I don't know," Emma said quietly. "What would I even say?" Sophia leaned back and crossed her arms. "Maybe start with the bird." Emma froze. The bird. The quiet bird. She hadn't thought about that story in a long time. The words were buried deep beneath layers of restraint and silence, but they were still there. And maybe she was tired of hiding. The night of the event, the auditorium was dimly lit and intimate, with rows of students seated cross-legged on the floor or curled into chairs. There was no stage, just a small circle, a microphone, and the sound of breathing. Emma waited behind a curtain, her hands trembling. They called her name. She stepped forward. The mic crackled softly. The room hushed. She took a deep breath and began. "When I was 12, I wrote a story called The Quiet Bird. It was about a bird who saved a forest during a storm, but no one ever saw it happen. No one even noticed it was there. And somehow that was okay. Because the bird didn't do it for applause, it just couldn't stay quiet while everything burned." Her voice was soft, but clear. I gave that story to someone else. Not because I wanted to, but because I was told that's just how things worked. Because being quiet was easier than being punished. She paused, looking out at the silent audience. And I've spent most of my life being that bird. Silent. Useful. Invisible. Until I realized that even the quietest bird deserves to fly. Her throat tightened, but she didn't stop. I left home without saying goodbye. I got on a bus to New York with nothing but a letter in my pocket and a suitcase full of fear. I had no plan, no money, and no one waiting on the other end. But I came anyway, because for the first time, something belonged to me. She looked down briefly, then back up. My story. Silence followed. Then, someone in the back started clapping. It spread like a wave, building louder, warmer, until it filled every corner of the room. Emma stood still in it, heart racing, cheeks burning, not from shame, but from something dangerously close to pride. She wasn't invisible anymore. And for the first time, she wasn't just seen, she was heard. Later that night, she sat on the steps of the library, the city alive behind her. Sophia joined her, 2 cups of tea in hand. "You were brilliant," she said, handing Emma one. Emma gave her a tired smile. I was terrified. Of what? That they'd hear me. That maybe my family would somehow know. That they'd feel betrayed. Sophia shrugged. Maybe they would. But you didn't betray them. Emma tilted her head. Then what did I do? You chose yourself, Sophia said softly. That's not betrayal. That's survival. Emma looked up at the stars faint through the city haze, but there. Her story was no longer trapped in a shoebox. No longer read by someone else under someone else's name. It was hers. And she was writing the next chapter, one breath at a time. Chapter 6. A voice on the line. Spring had arrived in New York. The trees along campus paths had begun to bloom with soft pink buds, and the air smelled faintly of new beginnings. Emma had just returned from a late-night shift at the diner, her hair tied back in a messy bun and her sneakers soaked from a surprise rain shower. She unlocked her dorm room quietly so as not to wake Sophia. The tiny room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of Emma's desk lamp. She peeled off her wet jacket, sat down, and turned on her phone for the first time in days. A single voicemail. From her mother. Her thumb hovered over the play button. She hesitated, then tapped. The voice came through thin and brittle, like paper on fire. Emma, it's Mom. I know you're angry, but things at home aren't good. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. He collapsed at the hardware store last week, and we've been barely keeping up with the bills. Olivia, she's struggling to find work. I know we didn't treat you fairly. I know we made mistakes, but you're still our daughter. A long pause. Please call me. We just need help. Click. Emma stared at the wall, her thoughts spinning. No apology. No acknowledgement of the years she'd been made invisible. Just a request. Just a need. Still. Her chest ached in places she thought had healed. Sophia stirred in the bed across the room. Everything okay? Emma wiped her eyes and nodded, though the tears hadn't yet fallen. It was my mom, she said. My dad's sick. They want me to come home. Sophia sat up, blinking the sleep from her eyes. Do you want to? Emma stared at the phone for a long moment. No, but I think I have to. Why? Sophia's voice was soft, not judging, just asking. Emma thought carefully. Not for them. But maybe, to know I can walk into that house and leave again on my own terms. Sophia reached for her water bottle and took a sip. Then go. Say what you need to say. But don't forget, you don't owe them anything they never gave you. Emma exhaled. She knew Sophia was right. But she also knew that healing didn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes, it just meant facing the places that once broke you and walking through them without shattering again. 3 days later, Bakersfield, California. The town hadn't changed. The sun was still too bright. The air still smelled faintly of dry grass and asphalt. And the Sullivan house still stood with its sagging roof and overgrown front lawn. Emma stood at the front door, suitcase in hand, staring at the faded welcome mat. She knocked. Linda opened the door. Her face older than Emma remembered, more tired, lines etched deep around her mouth and eyes. For a brief moment, her mouth parted as if she might cry, but then she simply stepped aside. "Come in," she said, her voice small. The inside of the house was the same. Same couch, same dusty photographs on the wall, most of them featuring Olivia. There were no pictures of Emma. George sat in a recliner, a blood pressure monitor strapped to his arm. He didn't look up right away. When he did, his expression was a strange mix of pride and guilt. "You're back," he said. "For a few days," Emma replied evenly. Olivia walked in from the kitchen, her face stiff. Emma nodded. "Hi." The silence that followed was almost physical. A chasm between them all. "Finally," Linda said, "we've had a hard year." Emma waited. "But we're glad you're here," she added. Emma reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. She placed it on the coffee table. "That's enough to cover Dad's hospital bills and 3 months of expenses," she said calmly. "It's from a grant I received. Don't ask for more. This isn't a favor. It's a closure." Linda opened her mouth, but Emma continued. "I'm not angry anymore. But I'm not the same girl you left behind either. You didn't raise me, I raised myself. And now I'm offering help because it's the right thing to do, not because you earned it." George looked away. Olivia's eyes glistened, but she said nothing. Emma stood up. "I'll stay in a hotel. I don't belong here. Not anymore." And with that, she turned toward the door. She paused just before stepping out and added quietly, "Take care of each other." Then she left. That night, Emma sat on the edge of a motel bed, window cracked open to let in the warm night air. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. "You okay?" Emma stared at the screen, then typed back. "Yes." "I said what I needed to say. And I walked away. Still whole." A moment later, Sophia replied. "Then you won." Emma lay back on the bed, a soft smile tugging at the corners of her lips. For the first time, she wasn't someone's shadow. She wasn't their disappointment. She wasn't even their daughter, in the way they had once defined it. She was Emma Sullivan. And she was finally free. Chapter 7. The interview that changed everything. 3 months had passed since Emma's return from Bakersfield. New York had embraced her again like an old friend, familiar, chaotic, and constantly moving forward. She had buried her past, not in bitterness, but in acceptance. The visit home hadn't reopened wounds, it had sealed them. Emma was now working as a junior researcher at a prestigious artificial intelligence institute while finishing her graduate degree. Her name was beginning to appear on published papers, cited in conference abstracts, whispered in academic circles. But it wasn't until she received an unexpected email that she realized how far she had come. Subject: Interview request. Faces of Future Science Series. Dear Ms. Sullivan, we're curating a special feature on young pioneers in AI. Your work with contextual language models and adaptive learning has caught our attention. Would you be open to an interview? Caroline Metz, science correspondent. The Atlantic. Emma stared at the screen in disbelief. The Atlantic wasn't just another publication, it was legacy. Serious. Respected. She replied that same night, fingers trembling slightly. The interview was held in a sunlit cafe in Soho. The journalist, Caroline, was sharp-eyed but kind. With a notebook thicker than her laptop and a manner of asking questions that peeled back more than facts. They started with research, then education, then life. Caroline paused, glancing at her notes. You've moved remarkably fast. From what I can tell, you started with nothing, no legacy, no connections. What pushed you forward? Emma stirred her tea slowly. Necessity, she said. Sometimes survival teaches you more than any classroom. Can you tell me what you mean by that? Emma looked down for a moment, gathering her thoughts. My childhood wasn't nurturing. I grew up in a household where love was conditional and success only counted when someone else wore it as their own. I had to fight for every piece of my own identity. So when I got a chance to leave, I did. And I've been building from there. Caroline scribbled notes. Do you talk to your family now? Emma shook her head. No. I helped them when they needed it. I made peace with the past. But that doesn't mean I go back to it. Caroline looked up. That's rare. Most people either run or try to fix it. Emma smiled faintly. Maybe I did both. I ran to save myself. And I fixed them enough to walk away clean. 2 weeks later, the article went live. Emma Sullivan, the silent architect of tomorrow's intelligence. It featured a full-page photo of Emma standing in front of the Columbia University gates, one hand in her coat pocket, the other clutching a notebook. The skyline behind her was blurred, but she was in focus, sharp, grounded, whole. The article didn't dwell on her trauma, but it didn't ignore it either. It painted her as someone who had climbed from the cracks, not with vengeance, but with vision. And something unexpected happened. Emails began to pour in. From students who had grown up in broken families. From young women who had given up scholarships. From people who had once been shadows in their own homes. Your story made me feel seen. I thought I was the only one who had to leave everything behind to find myself. Thank you for writing your story out loud. Emma read every one. Some made her cry. Some made her remember. But all of them reminded her her silence had never protected her. Only her truth had. That night, Emma walked alone through Central Park. It was quiet. Save for the wind rustling the trees and the occasional jogger passing by. She paused by a bench and sat down, staring up at the moon. Once, she had buried a card beneath a tree. Once, she had written stories no one would ever read. Now, her words traveled further than she ever had. She pulled out her phone and opened a blank note. For the girl sitting in the shadow of someone else's spotlight. You're not the echo. You're the voice. You're not the leftover. You're the author. And you deserve a story with your name on it. She saved it. It wasn't a journal. It wasn't a performance. It was a promise. To herself. To every girl who ever stayed quiet. And to the woman she was still becoming. Chapter 8. When the past knocks, you choose the door. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when Emma received the package. She had just come home from a panel discussion at NYU, where she'd spoken about ethical modeling in artificial intelligence. Her name tag still clung to her blazer, and her thoughts were still half caught in the debates from earlier that day. The package sat on the floor outside her apartment door. No sender listed. No return address. Just her name, Emma Sullivan, scrawled in familiar handwriting she hadn't seen in years. Her heart skipped. Olivia. She brought it inside cautiously, as if the cardboard itself might bite. Opening it slowly, she found an envelope tucked between tissue-wrapped items. A letter. And underneath, a framed newspaper clipping. She picked up the letter first. Dear Emma, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. Maybe you won't even read this. Maybe you'll throw it away. But I needed to try. I saw the article in The Atlantic. I read it 5 times. At first, I felt angry. Then ashamed. Then just sad. Because everything they said about you, I knew deep down was true. You were always the one who kept going. While I was busy being praised, you were the one doing the work. And I didn't say thank you. Not once. When you left, I thought it was selfish. Now I understand it was survival. And you shouldn't have had to survive family. I've started over too, in my own way. I'm in therapy. I work at a small bookstore downtown. It's not much, but it's mine. I'm learning to be someone who doesn't hurt people just because I feel entitled to more. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I see you now. Finally, with respect. Olivia. Emma let the letter fall gently to her lap. The framed clipping beneath it was from the local Bakersfield paper. A tiny article about a new community reading room, funded and organized by Olivia Sullivan, it said. She was pictured standing beside a shelf of books, smiling with no makeup. Hair tied in a simple bun. For a moment, Emma just sat still. She didn't feel angry, or vindicated, or even sad. She felt full, like the space inside her that used to ache had finally settled. Not healed in the dramatic, cinematic way, but quietly, softly, like the way morning light filters into a room without asking permission. Later that night, she sat on her couch with the framed article in her lap. Sophia, now her roommate in their larger two-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, peeked over from the kitchen. "Is that your sister?" she asked. Emma nodded. "Did she apologize?" Emma hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Not perfectly, but honestly, and maybe that's enough." Sophia nodded. "You gonna write back?" Emma looked at the letter again. "I think I will," she said. "Not because she needs it, but because I'm ready to write the ending of that chapter." She pulled out a blank piece of stationery and her favorite pen. "Dear Olivia, thank you for your letter. It meant more than you think. I'm glad you're finding your own path, and I'm proud of the woman you're becoming. We don't have to be close, but we can start with being honest, with being real. I'm open to that." With warmth. Emma. She sealed the letter and addressed the envelope. 3 weeks later, Emma returned from work to find another package, this time from Colombia. Inside was a plaque. Dr. Emma Sullivan, recipient of the 2026 Early Impact Award in Artificial Intelligence Research. She held it for a long moment, running her fingers over the engraved letters. This time, no one else's name was written over hers. No one else's face would take the stage. This was her name, her work, her voice. As she hung the plaque on her wall, her eyes landed briefly on a small wooden box she kept tucked near her books. It held a folded piece of notebook paper, the original copy of The Quiet Bird, its corners frayed and ink faded. She didn't cry. She didn't need to, because the girl who once buried her stories was now writing her legacy out loud, in ink and in her own name. And the world was finally listening. Chapter 9. A seat at the table. The award ceremony was held at a sleek, glass-walled venue overlooking the Hudson River. Emma stood among a crowd of innovators, scientists, and scholars, most older. Some world-famous, all dressed in black-tie finery. Her name was on the printed program, third on the list. She had never worn a dress this elegant before. Midnight blue silk, subtle, simple, and utterly unlike the hand-me-downs of her childhood. As she waited for her turn to speak, she looked out through the panoramic windows. The lights of Manhattan shimmered across the water, dancing like quiet fire. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You look like you belong there." "Oh!" Emma smiled softly, sliding the phone back into her clutch. "Olivia." Short, simple. No expectations. Just acknowledgement. And strangely, that was enough. The announcer called her name. She walked up to the stage as applause echoed through the room. The spotlight was warm on her skin, but she no longer shrank from it. She took a breath and spoke into the microphone. "When I was a child, I was taught to be small. Not by any textbook, but by the silence that met my effort. The praise I saw given to others for my work, the way I was told that sacrifice was my duty, not my choice." The audience grew still. "I was told that family came first. But sometimes, family teaches you to disappear. And sometimes, choosing yourself is the loudest act of love there is." I didn't come from a family of scientists. I came from a house where stories were taken before they could be told. But tonight, I stand here with my name written clearly. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I believed I deserved to be heard. A pause. Then, gently. This award isn't the end. It's a beginning. For every girl who grows up in the shadow of someone else's spotlight. I want to say this. Step out. Speak up. Your story matters. You matter. She stepped back. Silence lingered for half a heartbeat. Then came the applause, real, full, and rising like a wave. She wasn't just standing in a room of scholars. She had claimed a seat at the table. 2 months later, Columbia University. Emma stood at the front of a small lecture hall, writing on the whiteboard. AI ethics in real-world application. It was the first class she had been asked to co-teach as part of her new adjunct faculty role. She looked out at her students, dozens of young faces, wide-eyed, curious, nervous. She saw herself in many of them. As class ended, a student lingered behind. She was quiet, with dark curls tucked behind her ears and a nervous energy Emma recognized instantly. Professor Sullivan, the girl asked timidly. Emma smiled. Emma's fine. I wanted to say thank you. I read your article, the one in the Atlantic. It gave me the courage to apply here. I almost didn't. My family, they don't think much of girls in tech. Emma's heart clenched gently. I understand, she said softly. You're not alone. The girl smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. Thank you. Really. As she left, Emma sat down at her desk and exhaled. Not with exhaustion, but peace. She had become what she once needed. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Emma walked along the river. She carried no bag, no books, just her own thoughts and the breeze in her hair. Her phone rang. She picked up. Emma? Olivia's voice, tentative but clearer than before. Hi, Emma said. I wanted to tell you. I read your lecture notes. The ones you posted online. They're incredible. I printed them out and started a discussion group at the bookstore. Emma blinked, surprised. Really? Yeah, Olivia said. It's small, but people are listening. You're helping more than you know. Emma's throat tightened. Thanks, Liv, she said. A long pause. I know I can't go back and change everything, Olivia added. But maybe we can build something new. Slowly, Emma closed her eyes, feeling the cool wind pass over her face. Maybe we can, she whispered. As night settled, Emma looked up at the sky. She thought of the quiet bird, the girl who buried stories, the woman who unburied herself. She smiled and walked forward, not as a shadow, but as a light. Chapter 10. The light that doesn't fade. The summer brought warmth to the city, mornings that smelled of coffee and asphalt, and evenings where the sky turned gold before melting into blue-gray. Emma had fallen into a rhythm. Teaching, researching, mentoring, and, occasionally, just being. One Thursday afternoon, she sat in a sunlit corner of the Columbia campus cafe, reviewing student essays. Across from her was a girl named Rachel, quiet, anxious, and brilliant. Rachel was explaining her idea for a research paper on algorithmic bias in facial recognition. But her voice kept trailing off, as if afraid to speak too loudly. Emma leaned in. Rachel, your thoughts are valid. You don't need permission to say them out loud. Rachel looked up, startled. But what if I'm wrong? Emma smiled. Then you revise. But don't silence yourself before the world even gets a chance to hear you. Rachel blinked, then nodded slowly, as if something inside her had been unlocked. That evening, Emma returned home to find an envelope slipped under her apartment door. Not a bill, not a form, just her name in blue ink. She opened it. Inside was a short letter, typed and signed. Miss Sullivan, in recognition of your exceptional contribution to AI research and ethics education, and your commitment to mentoring underrepresented voices in science, we are proud to inform you that you have been selected as one of the keynote speakers for the International AI Ethics Conference this fall in Geneva. Your journey and your voice has become an example for the next generation of thinkers. Warm regards, Dr. Lionel Koss, IIC Committee. Emma held the letter to her chest. The girl who once gave up her story had now been asked to tell it on the world stage. 3 months later, Geneva, Switzerland. The Grand Hall was filled with delegates from more than 40 countries, seated beneath glass chandeliers and surrounded by translations in a dozen languages. Emma stepped onto the podium, her hair pulled back in a simple braid, her notes minimal. She didn't need to read what she already lived. I come from a house where silence was taught before speech, where success was a hand-me-down and the spotlight was never mine. But I also come from resilience, from the quiet that sharpened my listening, from shadows that taught me where the light should fall. She paused, looked out at the sea of faces. We often design intelligence as a mirror to ourselves. So what does it say when that intelligence replicates our cruelty, our biases, our silences? To build a just future, we don't just need better algorithms. We need louder truths. Voices that were once buried, now leading the room. Women, immigrants, the overlooked, the underestimated. If we want ethical intelligence, we must start by recognizing who we've ignored. The room fell into stillness, not from indifference, but reverence. This is no longer about whether we can teach machines to see. It's about whether we, ourselves, are ready to look in the mirror. When she stepped down, they rose. A standing ovation. Back in New York, weeks later, Emma stood at the edge of a rooftop garden. Now officially appointed the youngest advisor on Columbia's ethical tech board. She looked out over the same city she had once arrived at with nothing but a letter in her pocket and fear in her bones. Her phone buzzed. A photo from Olivia. It was a snapshot of a group of teenagers in a small reading room. Above them on the wall was a quote painted in black letters. "You're not the echo. You're the voice." Emma Sullivan. Underneath the image, Olivia had typed, "I told them that used to be my little sister. But now I tell them she's a light. One that doesn't fade." Emma stared at the screen, then at the sky. Not every story ends with a hug, a reconciliation, a perfect family portrait. Some end with growth, with distance and dignity, with scars that become maps, and with a woman who walks forward, alone, perhaps, but never lonely, because she carries every version of herself with grace. The girl in the shadow, the student on the bus, the woman at the podium, and now, the voice that others follow. Emma Sullivan was never looking to be anyone's hero. She simply chose to live as if her story mattered. And in doing so, she lit a path for others who were still learning to speak. Chapter 11. Letters to the Girl I Used to Be. The first snowfall of the year blanketed New York in a soft hush. Streets slowed. Traffic lights glowed through the flurries like distant stars. From the window of her office at the university, Emma watched the snow settle on the ivy vines and rooftops. It had been over 10 years since the night she stepped off the bus with her world in a duffel bag. 10 years of building, of burning and rebuilding, of walking away and walking toward. She now had an office with her name on the door. A team of students who looked to her not as an exception, but as a standard. A research paper cited by people she once thought too brilliant to ever speak her name. But what she didn't have, what she still missed, was a true sense of what it meant to belong. Not in the academic world. She had earned her place there. But to herself. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a worn, wooden box. Inside it, beneath papers and fading mementos, was an envelope she'd never opened. Her own letter, written years ago, the night she gave her first public talk, the night she told the story of the quiet bird out loud, to the girl who ran, to the girl who stayed quiet, to the girl who loved without receiving love back. Emma opened the letter. She hadn't remembered the exact words, but they read like water in a desert. You were never wrong for wanting more. You were never selfish for leaving to save yourself. You were never invisible. You were just too bright for the space they kept you in. Her fingers trembled slightly. There will be a day when your name is spoken with respect, not resistance. When you will give without being emptied. When you will speak and others will pause. And on that day, I want you to do one thing. Look back. See me. The version of you who needed this so badly. Tell her she made it. That it was worth it. Every step. Tell her she is free. Emma wiped her eyes with her sleeve. She looked out the window again. Then, she pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began writing. This time, it was to someone else. Dear Rachel, I've been thinking about our conversation the other day. About how you feel like your voice still shakes too much, that maybe you're not meant for this field. I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me. It's not about being fearless. It's about speaking anyway. The world doesn't need perfect voices. It needs honest ones. Your ideas matter. You matter. Let the room feel your courage, even if you have to whisper it at first. I'll be in the front row listening. With belief. Emma. She folded the letter, sealed it in a simple envelope, and placed it on Rachel's desk that afternoon. That night, Emma met Olivia for tea. They had started seeing each other every few months, soft, brief check-ins that no longer reopened wounds, but watered something tentative and green between them. Olivia talked about her book club. Emma shared a few funny stories from her lectures. It wasn't reconciliation in the dramatic sense, but it was something better. Consistency, respect, boundaries that protected them both. As they said goodbye outside the cafe, Olivia pulled Emma into a gentle hug. I still think you were the bravest out of all of us, she whispered. Emma didn't correct her, didn't flinch. She just nodded. And I think you're still growing. They parted under the streetlight, each heading in different directions. But for once, not as strangers. As sisters. Back in her apartment, Emma poured a cup of tea and curled up by the window. Outside, the snow was still falling, quiet, unbothered, soft as memory. She opened her laptop and began a new document. Title: The Shadow and the Light. Notes on finding your own name. It would be her first book. Not a research paper. Not a study. But a memoir. For every girl who was told to sit quietly. For every student who never saw themselves in the spotlight. For every Emma who ever whispered their story to the wind, hoping one day it would come back to them whole. This was the moment she had once only dreamed of. Not applause, not revenge, but peace. She smiled and typed the first words. I used to think survival meant disappearing. Now I know it means refusing to. And with that, the final chapter began. Chapter 12, the book signing with no family name. 6 months later. Emma stood in front of a long table inside a small but beautifully lit bookstore in Soho. Her debut memoir, The Shadow and the Light, Notes on Finding Your Own Name, was stacked neatly beside her in glossy towers. The cover was simple, just her name and the silhouette of a bird flying out of the dark. The line of readers curled around shelves and through aisles. Most were young women, some college-aged, others older. Some came alone. Some came holding hands with daughters. A few brought copies already covered in notes, sticky tabs, and folded corners. And each time Emma signed her name, she looked up and met their eyes. You wrote what I couldn't say, one whispered. Another clutched her hand. I left home last year. Your story helped me not go back. Each voice held something Emma recognized, that old, familiar ache of being unseen, and the silent courage it took to leave. Midway through the event, Olivia arrived. She waited patiently in line like everyone else, no special treatment. When it was her turn, she placed a worn copy of the book on the table, dog-eared, underlined, passages circled with red pen. I read it twice, Olivia said. Emma looked up. Did it hurt? Olivia nodded. But it helped more. Emma signed the inside cover. To Olivia, who once stood in the light without knowing who was holding it up. May we both walk forward together now, side by side. They embraced, not to erase the past, but to honor the distance they had traveled through it. After the event, as the bookstore emptied, Emma stayed behind to help clean up. The manager approached her with a quiet smile. "There's a girl here who says she doesn't want to talk. Just sit nearby while you pack." Emma looked over. Rachel. She sat in the corner, knees drawn up, reading chapter 11 of the book. The one titled, "The Classroom Where I Found My Voice." Emma didn't disturb her. She just kept folding the tablecloths, packing her pens, collecting the pieces of the day. Sometimes healing doesn't roar. It sits in the same room with the pain and chooses not to flinch. That night, Emma returned home, placed the final signed copy of her book on her shelf, and sank into her chair. She turned on the voice recorder on her phone and began speaking, soft and steady. "For a long time, I thought I had to become someone else to be loved. Someone easier. Someone quieter. Someone who made others more comfortable. But what I've learned is that the right people don't need you to shrink. They meet you where you are and still make room for your name. My name is Emma Sullivan. I was the shadow. I was the silence. But now I'm the voice." She stopped the recording and sat in stillness. Outside, the city glowed like a memory that never turned bitter. Just real. Just lived. She closed her eyes and smiled. Epilogue. 10 years from now, a young girl stands at the podium in the same university lecture hall Emma once taught in. She's nervous, gripping her note cards. "My name is Liana. I'm a first-generation college student. I want to talk about who inspired me to study AI and advocacy. Someone who taught me that visibility is more than being seen, it's about being valued." She holds up a copy of The Shadow and the Light. "She changed the course of my life, not by being perfect, but by being brave." In the back row, Emma sits quietly, older now, hands folded in her lap. She doesn't need to speak. The echo is already out there. Spoken, carried, believed, and it no longer belongs to silence. Chapter 13. The Archive of Unspoken Girls. It was early morning at Columbia, the air brisk with the first hint of fall. Golden leaves danced across the courtyard, and the campus library, normally quiet at this hour, buzzed with quiet footsteps and low murmurs. Emma had been invited to view something special. The university was officially naming a new reading room after her. Not for her accolades, not for her books, but for her impact. The Emma Sullivan Room for Unheard Voices would house a growing collection of memoirs, letters, essays, and oral histories from students and alumni who had overcome adversity, particularly those whose struggles began, not in lecture halls, but in living rooms. As she stepped into the room for the first time, she was overwhelmed. One wall bore a quote, hand-painted in elegant serif font. "You are not selfish for choosing to live. You are not broken for walking away. You are not unworthy because you said no." Emma Sullivan. There were bookshelves already half-filled, some with her own book, The Shadow and the Light, but many more by others who had come after her. Titles she didn't recognize, but voices she instantly understood. Voices that once had nowhere to live. Now they had a home. The librarian, an older woman with kind eyes, led Emma to a private section, a small archive of letters donated anonymously over the years. "These were submitted after your Atlantic article went viral," she said. "We didn't know what to do with them." Until now. Emma reached for the first envelope. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the pages. "Dear Emma, I was told I wasn't smart enough. Not worth sending to school. I read your story and applied to university at age 31. I got in. I'm majoring in computer science. Thank you for showing me it wasn't too late." Another. "Dear Emma, I used to hide in the school library during lunch. Reading made me feel safe. So did your book. I'm training to be a teacher now. I want to build the kind of classroom I once needed." And another. "You helped me leave an abusive home. You helped me forgive myself for leaving my sister behind. You helped me write again. Emma pressed the letters to her chest. She had written her truth into the world like a question tossed into the ocean, and now the world had answered. Later that week, home visit in Bakersfield. Emma hadn't expected to return again. But this time, it wasn't a confrontation. It was an invitation. Her father, George, had passed away quietly in his sleep. Complications from years of heart issues. The funeral was small, simple. She sat in the back pew of the church, next to Olivia, both dressed in black, silent but steady. There were no angry words. No old wounds reopened. Just the quiet truth that some stories end without full closure, but peace can still rise from the ashes. After the service, Emma and Olivia sat on the porch of the old family home. The paint was peeling. The wind smelled like dust and old roots. Do you regret it? Olivia asked softly. Leaving? Emma shook her head. No. I only regret waiting so long to believe I deserved to. Olivia looked out at the yard. I was jealous of your strength. I thought being loved was enough. But I didn't know how empty it was when it came at someone else's cost. Emma didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, we were both raised to lose something. Olivia turned. What did you lose? My voice. My place. And me. Emma looked at her gently. Your conscience. But I think you found it again. Olivia exhaled, shaky but real. They sat in silence until sunset. 1 year later, New York. Emma stood in the back of a high school auditorium where a group of young girls were rehearsing a student performance titled The Quiet Bird. A shy girl stepped forward in the spotlight. I used to think being quiet made me invisible, she recited. But now I know, even silence has wings. And one day it will fly. Emma wiped her eyes. Behind her, the new teacher smiled. Rachel, now a graduate, now a mentor, now a voice. Emma turned to leave before the final bow. She didn't need applause. She had already heard it in the lives that bloomed from her truth. And as she stepped into the soft evening air, the city lights blinking like promises in the dark, Emma Sullivan walked home. Not alone, not unfinished, but full. Her story, like all the best ones, had stopped needing an ending, because it had already become a beginning for someone else. Chapter 14. The tree that held the card. Years had passed. Emma stood once more in Bakersfield, California, not for obligation, not for closure, but for something much quieter. A reckoning that had softened with time. The old maple tree was still there. A little more bent now, a few limbs trimmed back. But its roots remained stubbornly thick beneath the soil of her childhood home. The yard was empty. The house had long since been sold to another family, the paint now a brighter white. The porch redone. But the tree, her tree, was untouched. Emma crouched by its base, brushing aside dry leaves with careful fingers. And then she saw it, a small, warped patch of earth that dipped slightly, where a 10-year-old girl had once buried a birthday card she wrote but never gave. She dug gently with her hands, fingertips brushing against a corner of something soft and crumbling. It wasn't much, just a piece of paper, weather-worn, nearly unreadable. The ink had bled and faded, but the outline of the butterfly she had drawn remained. The card still existed. So did she. Back in New York, Emma sat on the floor of her apartment. That fragile card placed carefully inside a clear archival sleeve on her desk. Next to it was her second book manuscript. This one, different from the first. Less memoir. More letters. Title: To the Girl Who Stayed Quiet. Letters to no one. And to everyone. To her childhood self. To the students who still sat at the back of classrooms, too afraid to raise their hands. To the women who walked away from families that never learned how to love them safely. To the sisters who never apologized perfectly but tried. To the mothers who never understood and maybe never would. And to the daughters who left anyway. Excerpt from the final chapter. Dear Emma, you were never meant to stay buried under someone else's spotlight. They made you believe that love had to be earned through silence. That attention was a pie you could only watch others eat. That strength meant staying, not leaving. But you left. You ran toward the dark not because it was safe, but because you believed there had to be more. And now here you are. Still gentle. Still kind. But never invisible again. A few months later, TED Talk stage, Vancouver. The red circle under her feet felt warm, familiar, like the hundreds of classrooms, bookstores, and panels she had stood in before, but this time, it was global. Live. Translated in real time. Emma took a breath, then faced the world. When I was 10, I buried a card under a tree because there was no room in my family for my words. That card stayed hidden for decades. Like I did. This talk isn't about pain. It's about survival. Not the kind that merely endures, but the kind that transforms. We talk about empowering young women. But first, we must listen to the ones who were never invited to speak. I was one of them. And I'm still here. The crowd fell silent. Then, applause. A standing ovation. But even louder was the silence in her own heart, the quiet that once haunted her, now calm. Final scene. Autumn. Columbia University. Emma sat under a tree, not the one from her childhood, but one just like it. Leaves crunched underfoot as she flipped open a small notebook. A little girl, perhaps 9 or 10, walked past with a bright pink backpack. She paused, turned, and said, "Are you the writer? The one who talked about the bird?" Emma blinked, smiled. "Yes." The girl nodded solemnly. "I drew the bird for my art project. I think she's flying now." Emma placed a hand over her heart. "So do I." Chapter 15. Emma Sullivan, Ph.D. The ceremony hall at Columbia was quiet, too quiet. Emma thought, as students in black robes filled the seats row by row. She sat among them, her doctoral robe heavier than expected. The blue velvet trim brushing against her sleeves as she adjusted the cap once again. She should have felt triumphant. But instead, she felt still, like a lake after the wind has passed. Her name had just been announced, Doctor of Philosophy in Computer Science, with distinction. Her dissertation, Contextual Integrity in Adaptive AI, a framework for human-centered intelligence, had received the highest academic honors. Her advisor, a woman who once told Emma, "Don't wait for the world to hand you a microphone," had hugged her tightly after the defense. And now she sat with her degree clutched in her lap, fingers tracing the embossed gold seal. 10 years ago, she'd arrived here with nothing. And now, she had earned every syllable of the name they'd called her today. Dr. Emma Sullivan. But she wasn't thinking about titles. She was thinking about the girl who had once been denied everything except her silence. After the ceremony, there were photos and laughter, hugs and congratulations. Her students swarmed around her, offering flowers and even a homemade AI-themed cupcake with binary code piped in frosting. In the corner of the crowd, Olivia stood watching. She hadn't said anything yet, hadn't intruded. Just stood. A quiet, steady figure in a pale green dress, holding a bouquet of white daisies. Emma walked over. "You didn't have to come," she said gently. Olivia handed her the flowers. "I know, but I wanted to." A pause. "I don't know how to say this," Olivia continued. "But every time I see you now, I think this is what happens when someone refuses to be erased." Emma's throat tightened. "Thank you. I used to think you left us," Olivia said softly. "But now I see, you found you." Emma looked at her sister, truly looked, and saw not the rival, not the shadowcaster, but someone also learning how to rewrite a story. Someone still building. And that, too, was healing. Later that night, Emma sat on the rooftop of her apartment building. The skyline stretched out before her like a page waiting to be written. In her hands was the acceptance letter for her next step. Harvard Berkman Klein Center, Senior Fellow Appointment. Research focus, ethical AI and access for marginalized voices. It wasn't just an honor. It was a platform. A place to push forward the work she had always wanted to do, building systems that gave power back to the voiceless. Not just in machines, but in people. Sophia joined her on the rooftop, 2 cups of tea in hand. "So," she said, settling into a lawn chair. "Dr. Sullivan, how does it feel?" Emma exhaled, eyes on the stars. "Like I climbed a mountain I didn't know I was on until I reached the top." Sophia grinned. "And now?" Emma smiled. "Now I help build bridges. For others still climbing." Inside her bedroom, the old wooden box sat open. The faded Quiet Bird story lay inside, preserved like memory. Emma slipped it into a new folder. Labeled it, Archive, Beginnings. She wasn't burying it again. She was filing it. Like you do with things that once broke you, but no longer define you. Her voice no longer needed to scream. It only needed to continue. And that it would. Chapter 16. Thank you from the one who never heard it. 3 weeks after the graduation ceremony, Emma received a formal invitation in the mail. Elegant cardstock, golden trim. The words shimmered faintly. Bakersfield Union High School, commencement speaker invitation. To Dr. Emma Sullivan. As one of our most distinguished and inspiring alumni, we would be honored to welcome you back to speak at the class of 2037 graduation. Emma stared at the envelope for a long time. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because she never imagined they'd ask. This was the place where she had once been invisible, where her work was signed by someone else, where her voice never rose above a whisper. And now they wanted her words to echo through its halls. The day of the event arrived with the kind of stillness only memory can stir. She stood in front of the same old red brick auditorium she had walked out of so many years ago, a diploma in her hand and a storm in her chest. The inside was brighter than she remembered. Rows of folding chairs, a stage lined with fresh flowers, students buzzing with nervous excitement in blue gowns. Emma stood backstage, her speech tucked in her coat pocket, though she knew every word by heart. When her name was announced, Dr. Emma Sullivan, class of 2027, the room erupted into polite applause. She stepped onto the stage and paused. She didn't begin with her speech. Instead, she looked out at the audience and said, "I never got a thank you here. Never for the story I wrote that won the prize. Never for the homework I quietly let others take credit for. Never for the tears I swallowed so the room could stay comfortable. So today, I'm going to say it for myself. Thank you, Emma, for staying, for surviving, for never letting the silence own you. The audience shifted, some confused, some deeply still. I used to think a thank you had to come from someone else to be real. But now I know it means the most when it comes from the one who needed it the most. And to every student here who feels unseen, unchosen, unspoken for, this stage is proof that you do not have to stay where they placed you. You can rewrite everything." After the ceremony, as Emma was leaving, an older teacher approached her. Mrs. Grant. The English teacher from long ago. Wrinkles deeper now. Eyes softer. "I always knew it was your story," she said. "The Quiet Bird." Emma blinked. "You did?" Mrs. Grant nodded. "I didn't speak up. I regret that every day. You deserved more." Emma smiled gently. "Thank you. That means a lot." Back in New York, Emma returned to her office late that evening. On her desk was a package, no name, no note, just a slim envelope and a small wooden box. Inside the envelope was a single page. "Dear Emma, I found this while cleaning out the old house. It was yours. I think you should be the one to keep it. Thank you for helping all of us see, especially me. Olivia." Inside the box, carefully cleaned and preserved, was the original Quiet Bird card. The one Emma had buried under the tree. The butterfly still drawn in careful lines. The words faded but legible. Happy birthday, Olivia. I hope all your dreams come true. Emma placed it on her shelf. Not as a wound, but as a witness. A reminder that even buried voices can return home, and this time with wings. Chapter 17. The letters they never got to send. The first snowfall of the season dusted the edges of Emma's window, scattering tiny white flecks across the panes like forgotten whispers. She was at her desk in the small apartment she still kept in New York, though her work often took her to conferences around the world now: Tokyo, Berlin, Sao Paulo. She could have moved into something grander. But this space, with its slanted ceilings and uneven floorboards, had held her through every transformation. Tonight, though, she wasn't writing for publication. She was sorting through a stack of letters. Not hers. They were from students, anonymous, heartfelt. Folded into envelopes that had been placed in the Dropbox inside the Emma Sullivan room for unheard voices at Columbia. Some were angry. Some were raw. Some were quiet cries written in tidy lines of pencil. Emma read each one slowly, tenderly, her fingers never rushing the fragile corners. Dear Nobody, one read. I keep winning awards my sister should have had. She's gone now. I think I broke her. But no one blames me. Just me inside. Only me. Dear girl who got out, said another. I read your book under my blanket every night for a month. I didn't know someone could leave and still be whole. To anyone listening, if I disappear, tell the world I tried. Please. Emma closed her eyes. She had once written like that. Late at night. With hands that shook. With breath that didn't quite fill her lungs. And now, the world listened to her. Quoted her. Hired her. But these girls? These voices? They were still waiting. That night, Emma called a meeting with the board of directors for the Sullivan Initiative, her foundation that funded scholarships and emergency support for students fleeing unsafe homes. She proposed something bold. A national archive, not of published works, not of books, but of unspoken letters. A place where young people, especially women, could anonymously share the words they never dared to say aloud. Not for validation, but for survival. A space where no story would be stolen. Where every quiet bird would be named, seen, and remembered. 6 months later, the Unspoken Archive, Los Angeles branch. A tall building in the heart of downtown, once an abandoned library. Now repurposed and breathing with new life. Emma stood at the opening with tears in her eyes as the first girl stepped inside. She was no older than 13. She walked quietly to the submission wall, wrote a letter, sealed it, and placed it gently into a glass box with a silver plaque. To the one who thought she had to stay quiet. You are not forgotten. Emma watched from a distance, heart aching not from pain, but from awe. The girl turned, glanced at Emma, and mouthed a thank you before walking away. She didn't ask for a selfie. She didn't say a word. But Emma understood. That night, Emma stood on the rooftop of the building, overlooking a city that once would have swallowed her whole. She opened her journal and wrote just one sentence. Sometimes, the most powerful thing a girl can do is keep writing, even when no one reads it. Because eventually, someone will. She looked up at the stars, invisible behind city glow but still there. They always had been. And so had she. The girl who once gave away her voice. Now collecting the voices of thousands. She smiled. The archive didn't need to be famous. It only needed to exist. Like her story once did. Unnoticed. Unread. But undeniably real. Chapter 18. The Voice That Built a World. 1 year after the launch of the Unspoken Archive, Emma found herself in front of the United Nations Assembly in Geneva, again. But this time, she wasn't there to talk about artificial intelligence. She was there to talk about girls, about systems, about silence, About the price of being unseen. She stood at the podium. The quiet before her thicker than any applause. I've spent years researching how machines learn from data. But before I ever coded a system, I was one. I was trained to stay quiet. Conditioned to yield. Programmed to be useful, not hurt. And if we can teach machines to see beyond bias, to process human worth without prejudice, then surely we can do the same for ourselves. The unspoken archive wasn't just built to preserve words. It was built to save lives. Because a voice denied becomes a wound. But a voice received? That becomes power. She paused, scanning the room. Every government has an education budget. But what about a healing budget? What about places where truth is stored, not punished? Where a girl can write her story, not for approval, but for air. When she stepped down, they didn't just applaud. They stood. Delegates from dozens of countries. Educators. Policymakers. People who had never known what it felt like to disappear. But now they did. Back in New York, 1 week later. Emma arrived at Columbia to find her office door covered in sticky notes. Not vandalism. Messages. Thank you for being the voice I needed when I didn't have one. I wrote my letter today. It felt like breathing. Because of you, I didn't give up. She stepped inside to find Rachel sitting at her desk, now her co-director in the archive's East Coast wing. Once a silent student, now a leader, a writer, a light. You've started a revolution, Rachel said with a grin. Emma shook her head softly. No. I just made space for the voices that were already screaming inside someone's chest. That evening, Emma sat in her living room with Olivia, who had flown in for a quiet weekend visit. They drank tea, the kind of silence between them no longer tense, just lived in, familiar. Olivia pulled a folded sheet of paper from her bag. I wrote a letter, she said, eyes lowered. For the archive. Emma blinked. You did. I never got to say sorry. Not the way it should have been said. Not in words I wasn't ready to find. But now I am. Emma took the paper gently. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She simply placed it inside a leather binder labeled Volume 1. Letters of the Forgiven. Final scene. A classroom in rural Arizona. A teacher reads aloud from the shadow and the light to a circle of 7th grade girls. One of them, skinny, quiet. Sleeves tugged over her knuckles, raises her hand. Can I write my own version? She asks. The teacher nods. The girl opens a notebook and begins. I used to think I was the background. But now I know I am the page. Emma's voice, heard in voiceover for a documentary, closes the chapter. We don't need to save every girl. We just need to make sure she knows she can save herself. And sometimes all that takes is one safe place to write her name. Fade to black. The end. And also, 1,000 beginnings. Chapter 19. A letter to the girl who stayed. It was early spring in Boston. The sun filtered through the tall windows of the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard, painting golden squares across Emma's desk. Outside, cherry blossoms had begun to bloom along the riverbank, signaling not just a change in season, but something more. A quiet shift. A soft becoming. Emma sat alone in her office. The kind of solitude that no longer felt lonely, but earned. On her desk was a small envelope, sealed in wax. No return address. Only 2 words handwritten in delicate script. For Emma. She hesitated, then broke the seal. Inside was a single letter. Typed. Precise. But deeply human. Dear Dr. Emma Sullivan. I don't know if you'll remember me. We never met. But I remember the first time I read your story. I was 13. I found your book in a library in a rural town where no one ever said the word abuse out loud. I didn't even know how to name what was happening to me until I saw your words. I'm 22 now, studying at MIT. I left my home. I left everything I thought I had to endure. I wrote a letter to your archive that I never thought anyone would read. You did. You wrote back. You told me my story mattered, even if no one clapped. This week, I defended my thesis on human-computer interaction and emotional safety. I quoted you 3 times. My advisor said your work changed the trajectory of ethics in our field. But I'm writing not just to thank you for the research. I'm writing to thank the girl who stayed. The version of you that didn't run when the door slammed. That didn't stop writing when no one was reading. The one who packed a duffel bag and boarded a bus to a city that didn't know your name. Because she didn't leave herself behind. I found myself. Yours in gratitude, Mira Lynn. Emma folded the letter with trembling hands. She stared out the window for a long time, tears rising, but not from sadness. From recognition. She had written so many letters to the past. But this was a letter from the future. Proof that even when she felt invisible, she had been building something real. That evening, Emma gave a guest lecture at Harvard to a packed auditorium. She didn't read from her notes. She didn't open with a bio. She simply said, "When I was 16, I was told that survival meant silence. That family meant sacrifice. That love had to be earned by obedience. They were wrong. Survival meant leaving. Family meant redefining. And love, real love, meant choosing to live as yourself. Even when no one claps." I used to think I was writing for an audience that never arrived. But today, I know I was writing for her. The girl who stayed. A quiet gasp echoed through the room. Not dramatic. Not performative. Just real. Afterward, a young woman approached the stage with wide eyes. "I'm Mira," she whispered. "The letter. I'm the one who—" Emma didn't hesitate. She pulled Mira into a tight embrace. "Thank you for staying," she whispered back. That night, Emma returned to her apartment and pulled out her journal. The final page. She wrote, "The girl who stayed was never weak. She was waiting. Not for someone to save her, but for the day she would look in the mirror and say, 'You didn't disappear. You survived. And now you shine.'" She closed the book. Not with a period, but with a pause. Because the story didn't end here. It had simply passed hands. Chapter 20. Happiness is the freedom to choose. The crisp autumn air settled over New York City as Emma walked through Central Park, the golden leaves crunching softly beneath her boots. The city buzzed around her, a symphony of footsteps, distant sirens, and laughter spilling from nearby cafes. But inside her, there was a quiet calm. She paused by a bench where a group of young women were gathered, sharing stories and notebooks. Their faces shone with excitement, hope, and determination, the same fire she had once carried. Emma smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She had traveled a long journey, from the shadow of a family that silenced her, to a place where her voice not only mattered, but inspired others. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A message from Olivia. "Thank you for being you. For showing me how to walk forward." Emma typed back simply, "Thank you for trying. We're both still learning." She slipped the phone away and continued walking, her steps lighter than they had been in years. She thought back to the little girl who had buried a birthday card beneath the maple tree. The frightened teenager who fled on a midnight bus, the young woman who spoke her truth on countless stages. Now she was whole, not because the past had been erased, but because she had chosen her own path, because she had the freedom to choose, because happiness, real happiness, was no longer about approval or forgiveness or reunion. It was about freedom. The freedom to be herself, the freedom to say no, the freedom to speak, to write, to live fully. Emma looked up at the sky, where the city lights met the stars. She whispered softly, not to anyone, but to herself, "I am free." And with that, she stepped forward into the night, into a life written on her own terms.